Hello everybody, Martin Radner here from Radner Law Group, bringing you trial analysis. Today, I would like to do something which I haven't done before, but I think it might be fun, and I think you might enjoy it. And it's about the YNW Melly case. And there's really not so much going on right now in the YNW Melly case. We know that there's jury selection going on. We know that there's certain filings that were filed, which we discussed in our previous videos. And of course, if there's any more interesting filings, we're certainly going to discuss it on this channel. But as we're waiting for the jury selection process to get through and we're waiting for opening statements to begin, I'd like to give you what I believe the prosecution's opening statement should look like. And I'm not going to go through the entire opening statement. I'm not going to discuss all of what I believe the evidence is going to show in this case. But what I would like to show you is specifically how to deal with Detective Moretti. Because at the end of the day, what I believe is that this is a big part of this case is going to come down to how the jury views Detective Moretti and how an important part of the evidence do they view Detective Moretti. And I think that as the prosecutor, you get the first chance to speak to the jury. And during that time that you're speaking to the jury, you get the first opportunity to explain to the jury how you want them to view Detective Moretti and how they should view this case and what type of approach they should take to looking at all the evidence in this case and how it was obtained and how they weigh it all on the scales of justice. So you get the first crack at it, and therefore it's so important for you as a prosecutor to be able to discuss the different allegations with Detective Moretti. And as you know, as everyone who's been following this case knows, that there was a tremendous difference between the first trial and the second trial, and in specifically Detective Moretti. Now, already in the first trial we saw, and this was a big theme of the defendant's closing arguments, and as it should be, there's a big theme that Detective Moretti was a little bit too overzealous in this case, and he started threatening to deport people and threatening people with prison time and separating families. He was overzealous in this case, and he abused his power in some way. And obviously, that's going to be a big part of the defense in this case. Now, what's come out after the first trial is that actually there's more questionable conduct that he engaged in, and that came out through the testimony of Michelle Buttress, where Michelle Buttress said that she actually she saw with her own eyes, and she heard Detective Moretti soliciting another deputy to lie for him in order to make the search warrant valid that he was serving on Melly's mother in this case. So then now you've got another thing to add onto this fact for the defense. The defense has a stronger case, believe it or not, in the second time that this is being tried than the first time. So as the prosecutor, as you're approaching this, how would you deal with this information? And then the question is going to be, how does the defense deal with this information? So what I'd like to do for you today is I want to step into the shoes of the prosecutor, and I'm going to step into the shoes of as the defense attorney as it relates specifically to Detective Moretti and how I think each of them should deal with this information from Detective Moretti. Okay, so that's what we're going to do now. And so buckle your seatbelts, and I'm going to step into the prosecutor's hat, and then I'm going to step into the defense attorney's hat, and you'll tell me if you appreciate it. If you don't appreciate it, let me know. Let me know in the comments. Either way, whether this is something that you'd like to see or not in other future trials, or something that you appreciated, which kind of helps you jump into the shoes of the attorneys in this case. So let me put on the prosecutor's hat for a second. Ladies and gentlemen, the state has a burden to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. We are going to prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt. There's going to be no doubt in your mind, after looking at all the evidence in this case, that Melly is the murderer in this case, and he committed this murder as in the furtherance of a gang, as part of a gang member, and there's going to be no question in your mind about that at all. And you're going to see a lot of evidence. There's a lot of pieces of evidence that are all going to stack up against Jamel Demons, Melly in this case. And this is going to include ballistics, is going to include expert witnesses, is going to include cell phone data. We're going to be able to show you how Melly is tracked specifically to the specific location. You're going to be hearing testimony from his friends about exactly what happened that night. You're going to be, at the end of this trial, there's going to be no question in your mind that Melly is guilty. Now, something else you're going to hear about in this trial is you're going to hear about a certain detective named Detective Moretti. Detective Moretti was the lead investigator in this case. He was the lead detective in this case. And there were some other detectives and other police officers that were involved in this case from the city of Miramar that were involved in this case. And Detective Moretti is one of them. He was the lead investigator. And something that you're going to hear about Detective Moretti is that he gets a little bit overzealous in his job. He does get a little carried away. And part of the reason is that once he realizes that somebody's guilty, he's a little too overzealous about putting that person away, and therefore he may stretch the law a little too much, and he may even threaten people. He's just a little too overzealous. He's just too overzealous in his job, and that's something that he has to work on personally, because he doesn't really need that. We don't need all of his overzealousness and trying to get more evidence in this case. There is sufficient evidence just by what he uncovered, without even getting into any of his questionable conduct in this case, that certainly points without a reasonable doubt to Melly's guilt in this case. So you're going to be hearing evidence about possibly Detective Moretti soliciting somebody to lie for him. You're going to be hearing evidence about perhaps that he threatened an individual with deportation, and he threatened individuals to put them in jail. And that's just Detective Moretti getting carried away with his job. When he realizes that somebody's guilty, he stops at nothing to put that person away. And that's a problem. That's something that he has to work on. And it's not something that I can control. It's something that the Internal Affairs has to control. And it's something that unfortunately in this case you're going to hear about some of his conduct, which we agree with was certainly questionable and perhaps inappropriate. But the reason why we're continuing with this case is because you're going to see that there's so much evidence piled up on one side that is clear as day that Melly committed this murder. Okay, that's kind of the theme how I would play it if I was the prosecutor. I would, first of all, distance the prosecution from the detective. You don't want them to think that you're working together in this case. You as the prosecutor, you're trying to distance him. He's part of the city of Miramar, the police department. I have no control over that. He does his own thing. He goes to the beat of his own tune, and there's nothing that I can do to control that. As a prosecutor, that's what you want to let the jury know, that what his actions should not be imputed onto you. He did something that perhaps is inappropriate, that has nothing to do with you. You are just here to do your job, and your job is that you're also convinced that all of the evidence points to Melly's guilt. And that's what you're doing. And therefore you do that. And then also you kind of play down the fact that whatever you're going to be hearing about him doing this conduct, it's only because he was just overzealous. You know enough from the other evidence in this case that Melly's guilty in this case. So that's what you want to do as a prosecutor. Now, what should you do as a defense attorney? So if I was a defense attorney, let me step into the defense attorney's shoes for a minute and tell you how I would approach this if I was a defense attorney. Ladies and gentlemen, an investigation is only as good as the detective who's leading it. If you show me that a detective lied about one thing, there's a Latin saying, if you lie about one thing, you lie about everything. There's no way that I can be confident with you about the evidence in this case, because Detective Moretti, we see where his morals are. We see where his ethics are, and he was the lead investigator in this case. There's no question about it. And the fact that you're going to be seeing a few instances of him acting inappropriately, acting unethically, acting illegally, the fact that you're going to be seeing that in this case, that is just a window. That's just a glimpse. We can't uncover everything that Detective Moretti does because we're not with him 24 hours a day. But we uncovered a few things. And that is a symbol that everything that he's done in this case, we can't trust. And if you can't trust the leading detective in this case, you can't trust any pieces of evidence. You're right. The prosecution's right. There's a lot of different evidence in this case that we're not going to be directly able to tie to Detective Moretti's conduct. But you know what it does do? It makes a big question about, well, we know what he's willing to do for those pieces of information. What is he willing to do for other pieces of information? And that's going to be a big question in your mind as you're seeing the evidence come in, and as there's a specific jury instruction which tells the jury that they have to weigh certain credibility. They have to, you as the jury have to weigh credibility of the Detective Moretti who's going to be testifying on this stand for probably days. And if you can't trust him for one thing, how are you going to choose what to trust him for? But that's going to be your job. And that's why at the end of this trial, you're right, there's going to be some evidence that we can't directly tie to Detective Moretti's unethical conduct, but you know what? It leaves a big question mark under how he actually did that. And it's not speculation, because we already see what he's willing to stoop to in order to get a conviction on a person that he wants to be convicted. And that's not how this system works. That's not how the law works in America. The way the law works in America is that you gather the evidence in an ethical way. You gather the evidence in a legal way. You don't try to push people to lie. You don't try to threaten people to get information that you want to help your case. Be honest about it. And you're going to see that Detective Moretti was not honest about it. And that's going to make this entire case stink. And that's why, as a jury, you're going to have a tough time, very tough time, to be able to convict my client, Jamal Demons. So I think that those are the two ways if I was the prosecutor, I think if I was the defense attorney, that's the two ways that I would kind of approach that. Let me know in the comments if you feel that I've missed something, or maybe you feel that there should be some other arguments that be made. But again, I'm not going to discuss all the evidence. Really, I'm just trying to give you a flavor of what I would do with this part about Detective Moretti soliciting a deputy to lie, and the fact that that's going to come into evidence. That's what I'm just trying to give you a taste of. Okay, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and like to the channel so we can continue bringing this analysis to more people. Thank you. See you next time.